Salutations, people! Welcome to Page 3 Killers, Murders That Went Unnoticed, a podcast where we dive into murder cases that went unnoticed by the nation's newspapers.
Hi, Shay.
Hi, John.
Hi, people. Welcome to episode 8 of Page 3 Killers, Murders That Went Unnoticed.
Yes, in today's case, we're going to be talking about the Norfolk Navy murders. Now, this case today, we're setting up a little bit different than we usually do. So usually you guys know how we do it. We usually give you the killer and then reverse engineer the crime and give you the background and then tell you about the victims and then, all of that. But this time, we're going to do a little bit of a whodunit. So this week, we're going to give you the victims, the evidence, the suspects, and then you tell us who you think is the killer. Well, more importantly, it's John going to be telling you who he thinks is the killer. And then I'm going to tell you who did it. But before we dig in, John, what's our drink for today?
Already episode 3. I was not too impressed with my last performance, so we're going to try and up our game here. Alright, we have the Down Under Spritzer. Alright, I know what y'all are thinking. Every single one of these just has to do with where the thing takes place, the murders take place. That's not true in the future, not necessarily. But you guys get to try and figure this one out. Again, this one's pretty easy. Alright, so we're going to start off with a little Chianti. That's a red wine for anyone who's not familiar. It's kind of on the sweet side, so, take it easy. The particular red wine we're having this week is from 19 Crimes. Again, there's a tie-in with that. That's kind of the mystery you guys have to solve. And then after we have our Chianti, we're just going to take 2 ounces of club soda or tonic. If you're doing a little bit more of a dry red wine, if you don't have access to Chianti or you like something else a little bit drier, I suggest a tonic. It's a little sweeter. Very simple recipe this week again. You're just going to mix those two together. Your Chianti.
So we forgot to mention that today we are filming on location. Well, we're recording on location. We are currently in Williamsburg, Virginia, which isn't too far from Norfolk, where these dastardly crimes happen.
It's not that close either. Well, it's about an hour away.
I think it's like
hour and a half.
40 minutes away.
I don't know. I've never actually been to Norfolk.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, we're not actually going to drive by the base and go check it out. But you can see tons of pictures of the Norfolk Navy base online. It is like the least secret Navy base ever.
Well, the thing's huge. You can't. It's not like you can
hide it.
Hide it, yeah. Like when I was up in Groton, yeah. Technically, that's the world's largest submarine base in the world, but the thing was relatively tiny. Think of it. It was what, maybe a city block.
Yeah.
Like the entire, maybe 2 city blocks max was the entire size of the base. Norfolk is like multiple cities, like multiple towns put together, and also that area. It's not just the Norfolk, the one base. It's like 30 bases.
Yeah,
spread all throughout the Norfolk, Newport News, and all that good areas.
But before we get started with our main topic, how about we talk a little news?
News.
Yeah.
About what? Oh, when this happened.
Yeah.
That's right. That's our section. That's the whole point of our podcast.
So, these crimes take place between March 25th of 1982 and February 6th, 1983. So we got some really neat news cases for this.
See, those years don't pop out to me as being particularly special for any reason.
Well, I mean, they're not that they're super special, but they're interesting.
Oh no, I'm sure there's stuff happening all the time, but there's certain years where you're just like, big things happen.
Yeah, like 9/11 or the Vietnam War starting, or end
like
of World War II.
1942, 1945.
Yeah, like those are major years. Like
1964, Kennedy gets shot.
This is before we were born, so it doesn't even matter to us.
Yeah.
All right. So the first one I have here is Queen Beatrice. She's the the Dutch monarch. She's the first Dutch monarch to address the U.S. Congress.
I don't. So hold on. Okay, I always get this confused. The Dutch, they are from the Netherlands, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, she was the first Dutch monarch to ever speak before Congress.
That's because this is America, and we don't care what the Netherlands has to say.
And I mean, like, I don't think we really ever had a monarch visit, or
I'm sure we've had plenty of monarchs visit.
Like, we've had dignitaries, but not like kings and queens, like kind of.
I wonder if Queen Elizabeth's ever been here.
I don't know. I know she's been to Canada. They had the Crown Royal thing,
Yeah, that's why Crown Royal was invented.
Yeah. Okay, so our second big news item was Dennis Wardlow, the mayor of Key West, Florida, declared independence from Florida, from the United States, and declared themselves the Conch Republic for 24 hours. And how it worked was, it was because the government was basically shutting down tourism coming into the island because they had issues with drug runners bringing drugs in from like Cuba and up into Key West, because there's only like 50 miles in between the two.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So they were trying to stem that, so they were shutting down the bridgeways and searching cars, which wasn't allowing people to come in and out of Key West reasonably. So they basically seceded from the United States, then requested like all of this world aid as a new sovereign country. And then the president of the United States was like, listen, we'll stop if you just come back to the United States. And they were like, okay. 24 hours later.
This sounds like a Fourth Amendment issue.
And they still sell like all of these
Conch Republic t-shirts.
Yeah, Conch Republic t-shirts and everything, which I thought was interesting.
You hear that, Texas? Key West has more balls than you.
And it's mostly people that fly that rainbow flag that live there.
Oh, I don't care who lives there.
They have one of the highest population of gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual.
But that only lasts for one generation, so you don't get it, do you?
What?
Because they don't have kids.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that flew right over my head. Okay. Now, the next thing on our news was probably a bigger deal. So, Steven Spielberg's horror film, Poltergeist, is released that year.
Oh, and that's big news.
That's big news, yeah. We also had the 1982 Chicago Tylenol murders, where 7 people were killed by poisoned Tylenol found in Chicago.
It was Ted Kaczynski. We talked about this last week.
Possibly Ted Kaczynski. But, I don't know.
Oh, I was just listening to something about Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah?
Right, and where his house is.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know where his house is, and no one knows where his house is anymore, because the museum that used to have his house in shut down a week ago.
We gotta look it up.
Actually, I think what I was listening to was a couple of weeks old, so maybe like a month ago.
Yeah.
They just
shut
that down.
That was the museum in Washington, D.C.
I thought it was New York City.
No, Washington, D.C.
It was in D.C.?
Yeah,
okay.
in D.C. And they also had like Bonnie and Clyde's car. Like they had a lot of like crime memorabilia. Like one of Al Capone's suits. Stuff like that. And
then there was some eccentric billionaire who had a room in his house completely modeled after Ted Kaczynski's shack.
That doesn't scare me.
I need to look that up because I want that.
Alright, so here's the even bigger news, okay? Disney World opens the Epcot section of the park.
Yeah, who cares about who's getting murdered when you can get to go to Epcot?
Yeah, you can travel the world into
the future.
In one place. Now, also, we had John DeLorean, the guy that made the DeLorean that was in Back to the Future.
I don't know anything about that. All I know is he sold a bunch of cocaine to the FBI.
Yeah. Yeah, but he was not found guilty of that because it was entrapment.
I was going to say, yeah, they set him up.
Yeah, but they basically destroyed his entire company.
Well, yeah, selling cocaine is usually not a solid business plan.
Well,
I mean,
his
long
car
term.
Company. They did
Yeah, and in order to
fund the
car company, he was selling cocaine.
Okay, and then we have the first U.S. Execution by lethal injection carried out in Texas that year.
Oh, yeah. I just read about that, too.
Yep. Then we had Michael Jackson performs the dance moves that will forever be known
the
as
moonwalk.
The moonwalk.
I called it.
And then we had the 1983 U.S. Bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, which killed 63 people.
The Marines.
All right, so now back to what I was saying. Samantha Smith, a Manchester, Maine schoolgirl, is invited to visit the Soviet Union by Yuri Andropov after he read a letter in which she expressed fears about nuclear war.
Say that again? So the Maine schoolgirl is invited to the Soviet Union by its leader, Yuri Andropov.
Yeah, Andropov.
After her letter in which he expressed fears about nuclear war. I've never heard of this Yuri Andropov.
I think he was like the Soviet leader before. Before who the guy right now?
No. There was like 3 of them in between there.
Okay. Well, all right. Then we have Hurricane Alicia hits the Texas coast, killing 22, causing over $3.8 billion worth of damage.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of money. And then the Philadelphia Arena is destroyed by arson.
Never heard that either, and that's where we're from.
Also, McDonald's released the chicken nugget.
Chicken nuggets are born!
Yep, the chicken nuggets are born. And Cabbage Patch releases its first doll, and it makes its national debut, leading to basically riots for these dolls. I remember my parents getting one in... They were still super popular in like the
late 80s,
early 90s.
Yeah.
And then they just dropped off the face of the planet. You can probably get them on like Amazon now.
Pay big money for them.
Pay big money.
I sold a Teddy Ruxpin for like $50.
If you had just held on to it for a couple more years.
Yeah, it was probably about 10 years ago. I have no idea. I'd have to look up how much Teddy Ruxpins. I wonder how much Teddy Ruxpins are going for right now.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to look it up.
It still had the working tape deck in it too.
But now, the seedy side. Alright, so we have the Atlanta murders. The Wayne Williams, the Atlanta murderer, he is convicted of murdering 2 children and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. So this is a guy, he basically murdered African American children all over Atlanta, Georgia. They think it was like somewhere around 30 to 40 children.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it just nobody cared because
they were black kids.
Yeah, which is a shame. But yeah, so he was arrested. There was some controversy surrounding his arrest and trial. A lot of people thought that he didn't do it. So that whole case is just crazy. Now, we also have the school teacher, Carl Roberts Brown, murders 8 people inside of a welding shop in Miami, Florida, before being shot dead by a passing motorist.
Oh, hey, look at that. Good guy with a gun.
Good guy with a gun, yep. I'm not sure what charges the motorist was brought up on.
I assume none.
Yeah, at that time, there was probably little to no gun laws.
No, what are you talking about? Gun laws were even stricter in the 80s.
Oh, wow. All right.
No, but why would he be charged on anything? He is literally saved children's lives.
Yeah.
Like, it's... Guy's going around killing kids. Oh, this guy stopped him. Well, can't have that.
Well, it didn't say the guy that did the shooting was a school teacher. He didn't shoot at children. They were people inside of a welding shop. Like...
So not the welding shop at school.
No, just like a welding shop in general, like an automotive.
Oh, that's
welding
weird.
Shop.
I completely misunderstood that story.
Yeah. And then we have 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milken. is murdered in Georgia after being abducted from a mall 3 days earlier by Alvin and Judith Neely. She is tortured and raped, and then Judith Neely injects her with Drano and liquid plumber in her neck and then shoots her in the head.
I've heard about this Drano before. Why did she do that? Do we know?
No, I'm sure that there was some convoluted reason as to why, but...
That's not the first time I've heard of someone killing someone that way.
No, I feel like it's a common, among serial killers anyway. I would assume that it's extremely painful and all that, so...
I don't know.
So we're going to move into our case for today.
That we're doing differently.
Yes. So we are talking about the Norfolk Navy murders. And that is going to be the murder of 2 female sailors. Now, the cases are very, very similar. So they believe that they were done by the same person. But we'll get into that, I'll give you all the information, you guys decide.
All right, let's hear. I'm not allowed to look at the notes anymore.
Nope, he's not allowed to look at the notes, guys. So we have the murder of Pamela Kimbrue in 1982. She was a 23-year-old sailor. And she was in the Navy for around 2 years before the time she disappeared. She was originally from Bay City, Michigan, and was stationed at the Naval Air Station in Norfolk. She was reported missing on March 25th, 1982, and an intensive search was carried out, and on March 26th, Navy divers found Kimbrue's car submerged at the end of a seaplane ramp in the Willingby Bay, about 150 feet from the Navy Communications Center where she worked. Her body was found in the back seat of the car, and the Norfolk coroner's report said that her cause of death was drowning followed by mechanical strangulation.
Okay, what's that supposed to mean? Like she drowned and then someone strangled her?
So she was strangled, but she wasn't dead yet, and then she was submerged in the car.
Okay.
Yeah, so it basically tied her up, then and strangled her with a seatbelt. Yeah. So her wrists were bound with rope, and a seatbelt was wrapped around her neck, and she was sexually assaulted. Pretty brutal, pretty terrifying, and the fact that she was still alive when she went into the water because they found water in her lungs is just terrifying. Sure, she might have been unconscious.
Yeah, well,
doesn't
really matter.
Yeah. Now, there was some evidence found. The killer left behind a green-type ski mask and fingerprints. Now, the fingerprints, when they tested them, they did not match the victim or her boyfriend who used her car. So he also had a alibi. He was at work.
I was going to say, he was probably in the Navy too.
Yeah. So he was at work at his station. So he didn't do it. So that's really where they're at. They have no other evidence. They had signs of sexual assault, but other than that, nothing that was really testable because of the age of this case. It's before DNA really takes off. So the case goes cold for 12 years, which is just,
12 years is a gap?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So the following year, we have the murder of Carol Ann Molnar. Now, Carol Ann was a 21-year-old Navy clerk in the Armed Forces at the Armed Forces Staff College on base. She disappeared from the base on February 6, 1983. And on May 1st, 1983, her decomposing body was found 3 months later, partially buried under rocks of a seawall in the Norfolk base. Now, the coroner's report reports a lot of the same things. She was strangled, sexually assaulted, but due to prolonged time in the water, there was no physical evidence because she was submerged partially. So there was hardly any evidence, and she was in extensive decomposition state.
Sure.
So
being in the water does that.
And in 1983, due to the similarities, the NCIS linked the two crimes. So they believed that they were the same killer and everything. So that's how they started with that investigation. But like all investigations, every lead that they kept turning over just didn't pan out. And then they ran out of leads to turn over. So both cases went cold. Now, there were some suspects. So these were all suspects from the original inquiry. So the original investigation, right? So we have suspect 1. And his name was John Brennan Critchley. Now, this guy I read up on, this guy's crazy. He was nicknamed the Vampire Rapist. He was known for draining the blood from his victims to the point of death and then repeatedly sexually assaulting them. He was suspected of killing between 10 and 30 women. He strangled the victims that he murdered. So we have our Thai strangulation here. So that's something that he did. And during the date of these two murders, he was living here in Virginia. So he was living here between 1977 and 1985. And then in 1985, he moved to Florida. John was born in Pittsburgh. So other side of our state in Pennsylvania. But he was never convicted of any of the murders. He was convicted of kidnapping and rape, which held a higher sentence in Florida. So he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison in June of 1986. But he was released on August 8th, 1996. Less than a day later, he was arrested again for violating his parole. And he was drug tested, and he tested positive for marijuana. So they had a 3 strikes law, which sent him back to prison. So he goes back on January 31st, 1997. And he dies in prison from
autoerotic asphyxiation.
Yeah, on March 30th of 2002. Now, he was also suspected in a 1977 disappearance of a 25-year-old Fairfax, Virginia secretary whose skeletal remains were found by a hunter in October of 1978, and her name was Deborah Fitzjohn. And John was placed under close scrutiny because he was Fitzjohn's boyfriend, and he was basically the last one to see her alive at her trailer park where she lived. And he was questioned several times. However, nothing came to it due to the lack of evidence. Now, he was employed by, he was not a Navy worker, so he wasn't in the Navy. He was a contractor for the Navy. Yeah. So he worked for the Harris Corporation, and that's a Navy contractor / subcontractor. And Critchley had access to the Norfolk Naval Air Station during the time of the 2 murders. And then while he was living in Florida, in Brevard County, Florida, he kidnaps a 19-year-old woman, raped her, drank half of her blood, and that's according to her testimony. The woman did escape, and Critchley was later convicted of assault and charges of robbery for taking her blood.
Really? You can get charged for taking someone's blood with robbery? That's what they're going to charge you with?
Yeah.
But like, hey, cop, he just took half of my blood. Okay, we'll bag him overnight, but we got to release him in the morning.
Yeah.
Wait, half my blood is in his car. Yeah. So it's robbery. I mean, we can't hold him that long.
Yeah, so they charged him with robbery. Some of those charges were dropped in a part of a plea agreement. So I think the robbery charge was dropped at that time. So that is our first suspect. So, I mean, he's probably one of the more colorful, but not nearly. Like, you would think that he would be, like, the most colorful suspect on here. He's not. Okay? The next one we have is a spy. Okay? So we have a serial rapist, and then we got a motherfucking spy.
Like a legit CIA?
A legit Russian mole.
Okay.
All right, so let's go deep on this one. Now, the next guy is John Anthony Walker, and he is part of what is known as the Walker spy ring. He basically, like, got his sons and his brother to help him spy for Russia. And they were all, like, U.S. Army, U.S. Navy. And he tried to get his daughter to do it, and she said no. And she left the military so that he wouldn't ask her again. And she was pregnant at the time. And she was like, no. So, John Anthony Walker was born on July 28th, 1937 in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
A lot of Pennsylvania references here.
Yeah. He was a United States Navy Chief Warrant Officer.
Oh, shit. He was up there.
And communications specialist. And he was charged with espionage. And he was convicted of spying for the Soviet Union between 1968 and 1985 and sentenced to life in prison.
That's like 17 years.
Yeah, and they believe that the amount of information that passed from him to Russia was insane. Like, they said it was billions and billions of dollars worth of information.
Yeah, he was a chief warrant officer, and he was spying for Russia. Mm-hmm. And whilst he was spying, he became a warrant officer. Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Yeah. Now, in 1965, Walker was transferred to the newly built FMB USS Simon
Bolivar.
Oh, Simon Bolivar.
Bolivar.
Where he received a top secret crypto clearance to work on submarine communications.
That's cool.
Yeah. He basically handed them over schematics for U.S. submarines.
Well, that's what happens when you get a... Ironically, the ship is named after Simon Bolivar. That's just ironic.
Explain that to everybody, why it's ironic.
He was like a South American revolutionary, but basically all the communists in South America looked up to Simon Bolivar because he was like their... what would he be the version of? He would be their version of, like, George Washington.
Ah.
Like, he's the one who basically got a lot of South American independence from Spain.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So, like I said, John Walker was promoted in March of 1967. And in April, he was assigned the as a communications watch officer to the headquarters in Norfolk. At that point is when he recruits his brother and two sons to join his spy ring. And Daniel Rivera, a former sailor who worked part-time for Walker in Norfolk, Virginia, alleged that John was involved in the two murders of both girls, that he had a conversation with him, and that he said that he killed them and got away with it because basically NCIS was incompetent.
Well,
and that he was so good at being a spy.
He's apparently very good at being a spy.
Yeah.
He was a comms officer, and okay, so I know people who were kicked out of the Navy who worked in comms for sending, like, messages to the other ship, like an adjacent ship when they shouldn't have. Like, that can get you kicked out of the Navy.
Yeah.
This guy was a spy and became a chief warrant comms officer.
Yeah. And then when
This guy was a very competent spy.
Yeah. And then when he left, he had his brother and sons continue on passing him information while he worked as a private investigator in Norfolk, Virginia. so that he could be near where everything was. And he still got information. So at the time of the murders, he was working at the Navy, at the base, and he was still spying. So you have to question, did one of these girls or both of them see something they shouldn't have? And like communications that he was sending or stealing, like you gotta wonder.
Well, hold on. Okay, so where did this one chick work?
So the one she worked directly in.
It wasn't comms. One worked for the staff college.
Yeah.
Which would be for
and the
officers.
Other one worked in the communications.
Oh, okay.
So you have to wonder, did somebody see something they shouldn't have, and that ended their lives? But I have to say, his Daniel Riviera's claims were dismissed by a tribunal as totally lacking in credibility, which was the quote taken from the report. Now, our third suspect is Richard Whittle. Now, Richard Whittle was a courier at the Norfolk Navy base with Pamela. So he knew Pamela, all right? And he had a history of sexually harassing his coworkers, indecent exposure at apartments that he lived in, and making obscene phone calls. So he had some issues, shall we say. Now, he was transferred out to California after Pamela's death, and in 1993 he was just administratively discharged from the Navy for unrelated military violations. So I could not find out what those violations were. So I don't know if they were, other sexual harassment claims, because in the 90s is probably when the Navy starts cracking down on it more.
Yeah, maybe like 2090.
Oh,
like that's
2019, yeah?
No, like 2090. Sexual assault is like wildly rampant in the military.
Yeah.
And it is very encouraged to be kept under wraps.
Yeah.
Not officially encouraged, but there's a reason why they say only go up one slot in your chain of command.
Yeah. So when he moves out to California, he gets married and has a daughter with Jenny.
Jenny.
Jenny Silvery.
Do they have a kid?
Yeah, they have a daughter.
And he runs across the country?
Well, no, he was moved.
Did he play for Alabama?
No. Not that one. He's not Forrest Gump.
So it wasn't really Jenny.
No, but I thought it was funny.
Just Jenny.
Every time I see Jenny written out somewhere.
Jenny.
Jenny. Run, Forrester, run. Alright, so now I'm going to tell you guys about the police investigation. So we're going to dig into the NCIS files a little bit here. So both cases went cold, and then in January of 1995, the cold case squad was started by the NCIS. So that is the Navy Criminal Investigation Services. And they are tasked with investigating these cold cases. Because I forgot to mention to you guys, like, Norfolk Navy base had a ton of murders. Not just female, male, and a lot of them cold. Like, so they basically started up a cold case unit that was just going to look into old Navy cases that were unsolved. And they wanted to use the new modern techniques and technology to investigate them. So now we have 1995 is really the real start of DNA evidence. So now you have more processes that can be done to test DNA and all of this. So they're going to use that to try to solve old cases. Now, the cold case squad selects Pamela Kimbrue's case due to the amount of available evidence. So when they pulled the car out of the water, they found, the fingerprints on the outside of the driver's side window. But please note that it was not a clear enough print to do a 100% positive match. All right, they had the rapist semen, several hairs that were not Kimbrue's or her boyfriend's. All right, and the killer also left behind that ski mask and some makeshift gloves. What they mean by makeshift gloves, I do not know. They didn't have pictures of anything.
Some plastic bags or some...
Yeah, so probably used like plastic bags or something. Now, 14 years before, the investigators had exhausted every lead in the March 25th, 1982 murder of Pamela. Now, Pamela, she worked like the late shift. So or like the early morning shift. She started at 3 a.m. and worked to 11 a.m. And in the area that she worked in, that was the time period that it would be deserted. Like, nobody would be out and about. Witnesses inside the building said that it was a real foggy night when she disappeared. And you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, was a direct quote from one of the witnesses' statements. Now, at 3:40, we know that a witness heard a female scream. They looked out the window, and they didn't see anything that looked out of place, but they did see taillights near the seawall. A small search party found a stack of messages near the spot where Kimbrue's car was parked. A few days later, the Navy divers did discover her car in the bay about 150 feet from the ramp. With Kimbrue in the back seat, her hands were bound behind her back and her body secured with a seatbelt. She had been raped, beaten. Note that she had been beaten with a soda bottle, which was still found inside of her car.
And that's one of those good old-fashioned Coke bottles.
Yeah.
Not these newfangled plastic ones.
Nope. Yeah. So, now, to get an idea of just how extensive this investigation was on part of NCIS, they interviewed over 800 people and fingerprinted them for following 2 months. So that's practically everybody on the base. They fingerprinted and talked to every single person.
800 people is but a splash in the ocean that is Naval Base Norfolk.
Well, the 800 most weird criminal element of the Norfolk Navy base. Okay?
That's got to be some really skeezy people, because we're talking Navy here.
Now, the investigation team followed up on many leads. So they had John Brennan Critchley. He had means, opportunity to commit both crimes, and evidence of Pamela being raped and her wrist being bound, which was one of his signatures. He was a rapist. He's plausible. Now, John Anthony Walker, he had means, motive, and opportunity to commit the murder. He worked at the same base. He was spying, so it's believed that both girls may have witnessed him spying and forced his hand. So that was one of their theories. Richard Whittle worked on the same base with both victims and had a history of sexually harassing his coworkers.
Now, at the time, they didn't know that Walker was a spy, though, right?
No, they didn't know he was a spy at the time.
Okay.
He wasn't a lead until the 1995 when they looked back. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is their investigation. So these are just who they think. These were their main suspects.
So Walker wasn't interviewed at the time?
No.
He wasn't seen as a...
Yeah, he wasn't seen because he was a higher up.
Gotcha.
And they didn't think... I mean, just like they didn't think he would be spying, they didn't think that he would be a murderer either. So
it's the Riviera guy who said he saw...
He said he had a conversation.
And when did this happen?
That happened after...
This happened in 95?
John Anthony Walker had left the Navy when he was working as a private investigator, and he brought this ex-Navy kid into his
firm. Well, when did he say that he saw the murders in 95?
He didn't see. He didn't say that he saw the murders. Okay. He said he had a conversation with Walker.
Okay, and when did he say that?
Not like in the 90s.
So this happened in 95. He said that in 95.
Yeah, like in the 90s.
Okay.
He said it to the police in 95.
Okay.
But before, they weren't investigating it. They only just picked it back up. He says that, prior to them reinvestigating it, he had a conversation with...
Okay. Now I understand.
Yeah. So he knew that John Anthony Walker was a spy, and he said that he had a conversation with him that he murdered both girls and got away with it because the Navy is so incompetent that it was easy. And that just like his spying, he could get away with it. All right, and then we had, John Whittle. Like I said, he worked on base with both victims, had a history of sexually harassing his coworkers. Now, in 1982, not much could be done with the evidence they found. But now it's 1995. There's techniques now to match DNA samples. So they take that and they start testing that. Previously, the fingerprints could not be 100% matched to anybody. But now they're able to relook at them as well. So they're able to look at all of this genetic evidence that was left at the scene and test all of it. But what would really help the case is if they could get a positive DNA match on that semen sample that I mentioned earlier, and that would cement their case.
It would cement their case.
With those seamen.
And they were
Navy seamen.
Who knows what their rank was, but they could have been seamen.
In the spring of 1996, a female NCIS agent posing as a door-to-door canvasser knocks on the door of prime suspect number 1 and asks a few questions about his shopping preferences and asks him to put his answers in an envelope to protect the integrity of the survey.
Dumbass,
and then she asked him to lick the envelope. So he licks the envelope and seals it, and the agent takes that, goes back to the car, slips it in a plastic baggie, and takes that over to get DNA tested. So, I'm going to ask you, John, who do you think our killer is?
Did it.
Who done did it? So you have John Brennan Critchley, the vampire rapist.
Wasn't him.
You have John Anthony Walker.
See, he was my original one until you told me how they caught him. I thought it was Walker. See, it's not the vampire guy. You want to know how I know it's not the vampire guy?
How?
Because if it was the vampire guy, we'd be doing an episode on all of his victims, not just 2 of them. So that rules him out. The Walker guy seems fine until you told me how they caught him. I can't imagine that he was that stupid. But the last guy, what was his name?
Richard Whittle.
Whittle?
Mm-hmm.
So you purposely went about not saying a lot about him.
I gave you all the information I could find.
Which was not a lot at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I doubt that, even though the other guy was pretty famous, you could just do an entire episode just on that other guy, his life. So there's just going to be a lot of information on him anyway. I'm gonna stick with Walker. He's my guy.
Walker?
Walker's my guy.
Okay. All right.
Final answer.
Let's see if you are right. So the DNA on the envelope was tested, and scientists confirmed they could not eliminate Richard Whittle.
Damn it.
As the possible source of the semen. So Whittle was one of the original suspects. When the case was reopened, they re-interviewed him, and they found him more interesting, to say the least, when they re-interviewed him. Now, with the help of a forensic pathologist on the NCIS staff, the cold case squad developed a psychological profile of Whittle to help agents form a strategy of exacting a confession. They decided that a non-adversarial approach would produce the best results. After being met by agents at his workplace in June, Whittle agreed to go to a nearby hotel to talk about Kimbrue's death. After he was read his Miranda rights, Kennedy and case agent Bill Heath outlined for Whittle their version of her brutal death. At first, Kennedy testified in court that Whittle denied any complicity. So he denied that he was there, denied that he did it. An hour later, he cracked. And Whittle gave them the first of 5 or 6 versions of what happened. The last version was probably closest to the truth. Now, Whittle worked at the same job as Kimbrue. So he worked at the same Navy safety center in the communications department with her. And it's believed that he saw her that night and decided he was going to murder her. She often started her shift in civilian clothing and was wearing a blue jeans and a t-shirt. And Whittle said that he thought she was attractive. So the next night he drove his small truck to the parking lot sometime after 3 a.m., smoked some marijuana, and waited for her. She arrived at the center, parked, and went inside. So at this time, Whittle pulled on a ski mask and went to her car. When Kimbrue, Pamela, came out, he rose up and said, "Hey," and told Pamela to get in the car and she wouldn't get hurt. She dropped the messages that she was carrying and got into the passenger side of the car. Whittle said he reached over, pulled up her top, and began fondling her. They then ended up in the back seat where Pamela grabbed a soda bottle. At the same time, she pulled his mask off. Now, he said he grabbed the soda bottle away from her and hit her in the head with it, and then tied up her hands behind her back, and then he took her pants down and climbed on top of her. Whittle said that he didn't remember having sex with her, but he remembered strangling her and hitting her with the bottle. He said she slumped over but was still breathing. Whittle got out and pushed the car down a nearby ramp into the water. And here's the quote from his confession: "I never would have hurt her if she wouldn't have brought that bottle out."
So clear case of self-defense.
So he went on trial on September 24th of that year, and he was convicted in federal court and sentenced to 2 life terms. Now, unfortunately, that does nothing to close the case of Carol Ann Molnar, whose case is currently still unsolved
technically
to this time.
But they think it's the same boy.
They believe that it was the same person. They didn't have any genetic material in her case because her body was too badly decomposed. So all they had was the similarities in their case. Both of them were found in bodies of water. Both were raped, strangled. So they believe that it was the same killer. So how did you like that one? Interesting?
Yeah, it was all right.
Yeah, guys. So I thought this was quite an interesting case when I looked at it, and I was, trying to find something that would be interesting and on locale for us. So from Virginia, stay sexy and don't get murdered.